Ladies and gentlemen, The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live, Episode 3, titled Bye, just came out, and oh man, okay, alright, this episode was my favorite of the three, I think, so far. I loved this episode, but there was a lot of questions I had about this episode. This one left me on the edge of my seat the entire time, and if you want to check out my full reaction to it, my first ever video over on Jerry's Reacts will be linked up here. I have that full reaction there. I was on the edge of my seat like the entire time. This episode did not disappoint on many fronts. It answered a lot of questions that we had about, one, how Rick got there, what was Jadis up to. We got answers to why Rick was doing the things he was doing with Michonne and just so much more. I loved every bit of this episode. The only thing I think it missed was Okafor. I wish we kind of got to see a little bit of Okafor interacting with Michonne. We didn't get that. That's fine. Not a deal breaker or anything like that, because what we got was just so strong, and it did things that I didn't expect it to do, like, at all. I'm specifically talking about those dynamics with Rick and Michonne and how angry Rick got at Michonne about being there and all of that stuff. Obviously, it was intentional, especially when it comes to the ending scene, which we're going to get into, believe me. But when it comes to elements like that, there was just so much there that was just not expected for me. I love that this episode started out immediately answering the questions we've had for a very long time, doing what it needed to do and doing it in a very natural way of what was the whole Jadis thing, what did she do to get him in, all of that stuff. Now, we don't have concrete answers, and I just clicked end on the episode, so I don't remember every little detail, but I am glad we got to see more of a discussion there, and I'm glad we got to see the CRM in a light that looked like it was a big population, whereas if you look at a show like The Walking Dead Season 11, and we have the Commonwealth, it looks like there's like 5 people in that city. Here, it's believable that it's a big city. It's just the way it's told. It's just much better. And might I add, and I said this in my reaction, that they played music in the beginning of this episode that felt very, very much like The Last of Us. It was the same acoustic guitar riffs. I was like, okay, it's getting a little too close to The Last of Us, but it doesn't matter because obviously this is telling a totally different story. It's not like they're trying to copy that. I think it's okay to take some creative inspiration, whether that's what they were doing or not. I don't know. Not going to assume, but I liked especially what we got with Jadis and seeing her with, normal hair. I even love that Jadis or Rick later in the episode was like, you have a fucked up haircut or something like that. That was so awesome. I loved everything about that. But after we got all of that stuff, I liked how it showed from Jadis then in the beginning where she was excited about the CRM and what she did to bring Rick in and all of that to Jadis now. And I like that we got Rick being mad at Jadis for taking him to a place that he can't leave. I thought that was great, and I like what it told in the story. I like that juxtaposition to now, where you see Jadis and Rick fighting, and Jadis essentially just threatening Rick the whole time. And yes, we saw this on YouTube before the episode came out because they'd released like a minute long of this footage, but the context there was really strong. And look, I understand what's happening. I genuinely do. The whole situation makes sense, especially from the security perspective of the CRM. But the one thing that I'm still a little uncertain about, and I've said this in other reviews, is like, why don't they just bring everyone from Alexandria there? If the real threat is that, like, Rick and Michonne leave, why don't you just bring the people there? I mean, yes, okay, I understand the argument that there's A's and B's and all of that stuff, and if you brought people like Daryl, you brought people like Negan, I don't even know if they would, but you brought people like that over, they'd all be A's and they'd all be killed. I get that, but I don't think they're really scratching that surface. I feel like that, as of right now, is kind of a plot hole. Like, why didn't Rick mention that at all? If the whole thing is about protecting the city, like if Jadis is saying that every element to the CRM is keeping that city safe and sacred and blah, 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 why don't they just bring them there? Like, it's not, I'm just struggling to understand why they can't do that. And I'm sure we're going to get answers, because I think Thorne was saying later in the episode, because she got that briefing, whatever it's called, and now she is the Red Stripe and all of that. She was explaining that there's more reasons for that and why protecting it is so sacred and blah, blah, blah. And I get it, but also, like, I don't. Anyone could stumble upon Philly, and I understand that they did kind of show that in this episode and the other episodes, where like anyone who came close to Philly they would kill, unless it was just a random person that they found or whatever. But still, I don't think they're doing a good job at actually explaining why they can't just bring them in. I'm not getting it. If anyone wants to try to explain it in the comments, I'd love to start a healthy conversation down there. But I don't know if that's a complaint. It's just something that I feel like they're not addressing in this episode or in any other episode so far. And it doesn't make any sense to me, because it's the answer to me. It's like right in front of me. Just bring them in. Just bring them in. And I know I just went on a long tangent about that, but it directly ties into what happened with Jadis and the whole threatening of Michonne leaving and all of that stuff. Yeah, it's probably one of the more minor elements of this episode, but it's definitely going to play into the next 3. This is the big story. And now I'm fully understanding that. This story went from obviously the reunion of Rick and Michonne to the rift between them and trying to escape. And that also made me ask a ton of questions that we're going to get to later in this episode. Things like, why isn't Rick giving Michonne more info and more insight? And I know their time is a little bit more limited, you know? And by the way, before I get into anything, I just want to let you know, I'm not doing a full synopsis of this episode because I just have so many thoughts on it overall that I'm not going to waste time with the synopsis. I'd imagine if you're watching this, you saw the episode already, so you know what happens in the episode. But the point I'm making is, after that whole Jadis conversation, it just made me ask more questions as to why is Rick not just outright being frank with Michonne and being like, they already told me they will kill you if you don't come. And or they will kill you if you leave, like blah, blah, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, the point I'm trying to make is, I just don't understand why Rick isn't being so explicit in that. And especially with the whole Jadis thing, they saved that suspense of Michonne seeing Jadis until the very end of the episode, but there's such a dire threat there. Rick should have been saying that like the first time he saw Michonne in this episode. And I understand they wanted to tell a whole different story. That's fine and all. But I just feel like if certain elements went slightly different, the outcomes would have been immensely better. Like, I also don't understand why immediately after we got the Michonne scene, or the Jadis scene with the confrontation in Rick's apartment, I don't understand why he immediately told Thorne that she was an A. That doesn't make any sense to me. Look, I get it. He's trying to protect her, but if you were trying to protect her, you wouldn't make it so obvious. You know what I mean? That just kind of bothered me, especially because later in the episode, we see how strongly Thorne disagrees with everything that even Okafor was doing. So I'm not understanding why he would do that, because prior, I was under the impression that Michonne did a good job of building up this Dana story and all of that. And yes, there were some loose ends and things like that, like Jadis saw it. And just in general, what she was doing, she made it blatantly obvious that she was an A. It's just, why did you have to immediately say it? And I get it. He was trying to confide in a friend, but that friend, Thorne, has made no distinguishable effort to show that she wouldn't stab him in the back. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't understand that. And if anyone wants to clear that as well up in the comments, let me know. Just to me, it didn't really make much sense. But other than that, I really liked what we got. I like that Rick tried to build this whole like escape plan for him and Michonne, and my voice just cracked, Jesus. I like that he tried to build this whole escape plan for Rick and Michonne, and his intention was to never go with her and just try to pinpoint that it's a dire threat, you need to leave. But guys, it's Michonne. It clearly didn't work. If we know anything about Michonne throughout the whole run, as much as we love her, she is very passionately stubborn. She was never just going to leave because Rick was like, you better leave. But that's where I kind of have a rift. And again, it might sound like I'm complaining, But this is good storytelling. This is how you write a story. You write a story that leaves you talking, that leaves you wanting these things, whether it's good, bad, or in between. And yes, I've shit on Fear the Walking Dead for it being bad and all of that, blah, blah, blah. That is bad storytelling. That's a little different, but this, like, to me, I don't think the writing was bad. It's just making me talk about, like, oh my God, why didn't you do that? You know what I mean? That's how you build suspense. That's how you tell a good story. And yes, there are some problems there with the plot holes and things like that. But overall, I liked it because in my head, I'm like, Michonne, listen to the dude. But then again, in the back of my head, I'm like, well, Rick didn't do any good job of explaining how dire the circumstances. It's just crazy to me. It really is. But I like that after that whole escape point and Michonne being really, really pissed that Rick just like kicked her out and all of that stuff, righteously so. She spent, years and years trying to find him, only to find him and then be like thrown out. You know what I mean? I get that. But Rick could have explained it better. And that was kind of the whole thing for me. It's like, there was just a lot of that. And I'm yapping about that. I gotta stop. I get it. But later on in the episode, we find out, as I mentioned, that Thorne finally gets that briefing, and then she becomes the Red Stripe person, and now she's struggling to protect Michonne, which I also thought was a little interesting for how much of an effort Okafor made on Thorne. Now she has a problem doing it for someone else. I found that a little interesting. Like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't you want to keep that legacy? And maybe it's because Thorne sees that there's more to it. Maybe she was briefed with Jadis. Maybe she was briefed with Major General Beale. We don't know. I'm sure those are answers we're going to find, but I'm naturally really interested in finding those answers more than I ever thought I would be. Like, we got a lot already so far. We've got answers to where Rick's been. We've got answers to where Michonne's been. We've got answers to the whole A or B thing, the Jadis thing, blah, blah, blah. But now I'm just naturally extremely curious about what all of these little secrets are. And I never thought I'd say that because usually I find that shit really cheesy in these shows and things like that. But I'm genuinely invested, and that's good writing. I'm very glad to be this invested in this storytelling. I can't wait to see where that goes. And it's just, oh man, there's so much I could say. After the whole Lincoln Financial Field thing where she was about to kill Michonne, that was an amazing scene that kept me off on the edge of my seat. But the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh man, he's got to kill. Rick's got to kill Thorne. Like, I don't know how else this is going to go. Something has to happen here. There is so much pressure on this situation. It's just fascinating, whether it's Jadis, whether it's Thorne, whether it's even Major General Beale, who clearly knows what's going on to some extent. The whole thing is built on secrets, so it's really interesting to see. But there was a lot of that. And then later in the episode, the one thing I was confused about was also, I have a really hard time understanding Thorne to begin with because I don't really think the actress is doing an amazing job with the accent, or she is, and I just don't really understand it. I need to watch this with subtitles because this episode really got to me with that whole thing. But regardless, later in the episode, we see that Michonne goes through the consignment thing where they go off to somewhere in on the western region of the United States. That gorgeous shot, which really looked like a movie, and I loved shots like that. That was one of the shots that I was the most excited to see in the show, is when they were on those helicopters flying through what looks like the Alps, but it's clearly like Wyoming or something. I don't know exactly where it is. But I liked what we got there, where we saw Rick, Michonne, as well as Thorne, and Michonne stepped up to use that like lawnmower looking thing, which I thought was really funny, to be honest with you. And Rick and Michonne running on it was just funny to me. It was like Ricky Dicky Doodah Grimes shit. I don't know why, it was just funny, but regardless, I liked that dynamic, and I really liked that we got that clear homage shot to the Shane sequences in season 2 of The Walking Dead, where he's pointing the gun at Rick in the woods, and he's about to pull the trigger, but he doesn't. I liked that. That also kept me on the edge of my seat, specifically when Rick was about to step in. I was like, dude, this is only episode 3, man. I was freaking out. I thought something like that was going to happen, and I feel like I'm in the unpopular opinion or belief that something needs to happen there with Rick or Michonne. I think it's good storytelling. Naturally, as actors, they need to kind of finish their stories and things like that. But I wasn't ready for that to happen that soon. Thank God it didn't. But I can see where this is going. Something is going to happen. And it's just so fascinating to me. It really genuinely is. I can't wait to see where that goes. But then after all of that plays out, later in the episode, we see Rick try to explain things to Michonne and say stuff like, you can't be here, you have to go home, you have to go home to Judith. But again, in those moments, I was also like, Rick, just fucking explain it better. Tell him that Jadis has a gun to your head. Like, just explain something, do something, because she's not believing it. And I like that later in the episode, we got this whole heartbreaking thing where Rick just is outright, we're done. Like, we're done, just to kind of break her heart and like force her to go home. I liked that. I understood it, but I didn't like it at the same time because I don't want to see them beefing after all of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to see that. I don't think any of us want to see that. And then even later in the episode on that helicopter, which they shouldn't have been on because it was clearly the worst turbulence known to man, I thought it was pretty interesting the way that dynamic worked, where Michonne just threw him off of a helicopter with him. Like, okay, there was a little bit of a stretch there. You're gonna push a guy off of a helicopter, like without thinking of any ramifications of what happens next. And I kind of understand that was Michonne's way of like trying to escape, but you're in a fucking helicopter. I don't think you had a parachute on. What were you thinking? That was a bit of goofy writing to me, but it definitely left me on the edge of my seat because clearly they got some shit to hash out. But it's like, you could have just done this differently. You know what I mean? You could have done this differently. I mean, Rick should have explained a lot of this stuff from the get-go, but he didn't. I don't know. It all amalgamated to something to me that I thought was absolutely crazy. I loved it. I loved what they did with it. And I'm really excited to see where that goes in episode 4. Who knows what's going to happen? Like, genuinely, who knows what's going to happen at this point? Obviously, I mean, I saw the trailer. They're going to explore them hashing out their shit, and I hope we get answers to a lot of the questions that we've been waiting for with them, or at least discussions of Alexandria, of things. I hope Rick explains things better in that episode. But again, I'm not complaining. I'm just passionate in this because I thought it told a really good story, and I thought they hashed it out in a very, very good way. I really, really liked this episode, if you couldn't tell, but it may have sounded like I was ranting the whole time. I'm ranting out of love and care for the episode. I thought it was really good. Oh man, this was a fun one. I think this one, I'd argue, probably had one of the harder jobs to do because it wasn't telling the backstory to lead up to them meeting up. So now we're like kind of just in the story, you know what I mean? And I think this one just did a good job. This one felt like a movie again. I loved it. The storytelling was great. The cinematography was great. The acting on all fronts was great. Even Jadis. And I loved that Rick ripped apart Jadis's haircut. Like, speak for the fucking crowd, man. I thought that was so funny. All around, I loved this episode, and it's solidifying even further. This is my favorite Walking Dead spinoff, probably my favorite Walking Dead project. I think The Walking Dead is in such a good spot right now. There's nothing negative, really, I have to say, except for, like, why didn't Rick say things sooner? But I still liked it. You know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah, I guess the only other complaint would be, why the fuck would Michonne push them off of a helicopter? That's goofy. That's some Travis shit. You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck? But whatever. All in all, I can't wait for episode 4. Can't wait. Like, this just kind of pissed me off that I now have to wait a full week to see what happens there, you know? Oh man, I loved it. I loved everything we got. I hope you did too. I'd love to start a healthy conversation down there in the comments. And if you haven't watched the reaction, be sure to click here to check out my full reaction to The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live episode 3. You could find the full uncut version of it as well on my Patreon, so be sure to check those out there. And with all that out of the way, thank you again so much for watching this video. Until the next one, I'll talk to you later. Peace out.